Story number 1. The Trail of the Lost Souls. The first time we heard the stories, we laughed it off. You always laugh when you hear about places like that. Places people tell you are cursed or haunted, where the stories seem too outrageous to be true. People like to talk about the things that scare them. And the Trail of the Lost Souls was one of those places. It's a remote hiking trail deep in the forests of Canada, where the trees are so dense they seem to swallow the sun. And the air feels thick with history. People warned us, don't go. It's not just the physical danger, they said, but something else, something older, something that stays with you long after you leave. But we didn't believe in that stuff. We were a young couple, adventurous, craving the kind of excitement that could only come from walking the edge of the unknown. We had been on plenty of trails, had seen the rugged beauty of the Canadian wilderness, and we thought, what's the worst that could happen? 3 days later, I'd know exactly what the worst was. It was the third night when it started. We had been trekking along the trail for 2 days already, taking in the breathtaking sights, enjoying the solitude, and feeling the cool air rush through the trees. We had set up camp near a clearing, the kind where the moonlight seems to shine just a little too bright, as if trying to light up things that shouldn't be lit. The first few hours were calm, peaceful even. We joked around, made some dinner, and drank a little too much. But as the night deepened, the forest around us became still, unnervingly still. The wind died down completely, and the only sound left was the occasional crackle of the fire. That's when I first heard it. A sigh, low and deep, like a heavy breath carried on the breeze, coming from the direction of the trees. I froze. I wasn't sure if my mind was playing tricks on me. I looked over at Sarah, who was staring out into the darkness, her eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, my throat tight. The sigh came again, this time louder, more distinct. It wasn't just the wind. It sounded like someone, or something, was breathing. I stood up, trying to shake off the chill creeping up my spine. "Probably just an animal," I said, more to convince myself than her. I grabbed a flashlight and pointed it into the dark woods. The beam cut through the shadows, bouncing off the trunks of the trees. Nothing. "Maybe we should go inside the tent for a while," Sarah suggested, her voice trembling slightly. But before I could respond, I heard it again, this time, much closer. The sound of footsteps, light, quick steps, like someone was walking in circles around our camp. No animal moved like that. No animal walked on 2 legs. My heart started to race, and I quickly turned to Sarah. But she wasn't looking at me. She was staring off into the darkness, her face pale. "Something's out there," she said, barely audible. The footsteps stopped. Then, out of the silence, I heard a voice, a whisper, almost a moan, carried by the wind. "Help me." I felt my stomach drop. That voice wasn't human. It was wrong. Before I could react, there was another sound, a faint, eerie laugh, like the soft cackling of a child who had been lost for too long. It echoed in the woods, and I could feel the air around me grow cold, like a blanket of frost had settled over us. The fire seemed to dim, as if the forest was closing in on us, suffocating us. "We have to leave," Sarah said, her voice urgent now. I grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the tent. We zipped ourselves inside, our breaths rapid and shallow. We tried to tell ourselves it was just a trick of the mind, that maybe we had too much to drink, that the forest was playing games with us. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The feeling of being watched had grown stronger. It felt like we weren't alone anymore, not in the way you'd expect, but in the way that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. We tried to sleep, but every sound outside made my heart race. Every rustle in the trees, every crack of a branch, each sound seemed to come from a different direction, as if something was circling us. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just outside the tent, waiting, watching. The next morning, the forest seemed almost normal again. The birds were singing, the wind had picked up, and everything felt alive again. But when we packed up to leave, things got stranger. We reached a point on the trail that I hadn't recognized before. There was a clearing ahead, one I was sure we hadn't passed the day before. The trees had a different look to them, their trunks twisted and gnarled in ways I hadn't seen earlier. It was as though the path itself had shifted overnight. That's when we saw it. At the edge of the clearing, standing motionless in the shadows of the trees, was a figure, a man. He was tall, dressed in old, ragged clothes, and he was staring directly at us. But his face, it wasn't right. His eyes were hollow, dark like empty sockets, and his mouth hung open in a grimace, as if frozen in an eternal scream. I couldn't move. Sarah squeezed my arm, and together, we took a hesitant step forward. The figure didn't budge. It just stood there, unmoving, as if waiting for us to come closer. We took another step, and then, as if it was nothing more than a dream, the figure disappeared, vanished, like it was never there. We both stood there, frozen in place. A cold gust of wind swept through the clearing, rustling the leaves and making the hairs on my neck stand on end. "Let's go," I whispered, my voice barely audible. We turned and ran, not looking back, not daring to glance at the spot where the figure had been. We didn't stop until we reached the edge of the forest. We didn't say a word to each other, not until we were far away from that cursed place. When we returned home, we did what we should have done before. We Googled the trail. It didn't take long to find the stories. Stories of people who had disappeared on that very path. People who had walked in, just like us, and never come out. Stories of the souls of the lost, trapped in the woods, forever wandering, forever searching for something they could never find. We had walked through the trail of the lost souls, and we had seen one of them. I don't know what it was that we encountered out there in the forest. I don't know if it was a ghost, a spirit, or something else entirely. All I know is this: we got lucky. We made it out. But the woods, they don't forget. And neither do I. I haven't hiked in the forest since, and I never will again. Story number 2. The disappearance in the royal forest. It's a strange thing. The way we think about the places that scare us. We always imagine them as something out of a storybook, a dark cave, a haunted house, a highway that winds into oblivion. We tell ourselves we're not afraid, that we've got control, that nothing can touch us. That's what I told myself. Anyway, when I decided to walk through the royal forest in England, that sprawling, eerie woodland where the air itself seems to whisper secrets you're not meant to hear, I had heard the stories. Of course, everyone has. The strange disappearances, the people who never made it out. But I was always one of those guys who didn't believe in ghosts, didn't believe in curses. The world, I thought, was too rational for such things. If you followed the rules, you'd be fine. That was, of course, before I found myself in the forest. It started innocently enough. I had been hiking the trails for a while, exploring the rough paths that crisscrossed the royal forest. The air was cool, the kind of crisp chill you'd expect in early autumn. The trees towered above me, their leaves turning golden, the scent of earth and pine in the air. I was out there to clear my head, to lose myself for a bit. It was supposed to be simple, just me and nature, one step at a time. But the forest doesn't let you wander freely, not for long. I started out on a well-known trail, one that wound through the heart of the woods. It wasn't a particularly long hike, maybe an hour or so, but something about the way the trees closed in around me felt different. The path seemed to stretch on longer than I remembered, the trees becoming denser, the light filtering through the branches growing dimmer. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. After all, it was the kind of place that made you feel small, insignificant, like you were just another fleeting thing in the grand design of nature. But as I continued, I noticed something subtle at first but then unmistakable. The path didn't look the same. It wasn't a dramatic change. No sudden shifts in the landscape or sudden darkness falling over the woods. But there was a sense of familiarity lost. The path had always been clear before, always defined by the markers, the worn patches of earth that showed where others had walked. But now, the trail seemed to merge with the underbrush, the trees growing closer together. The air felt heavier, thicker, like I was walking through a fog. Even though the sky was clear, I couldn't explain it. I wasn't lost, exactly, but I didn't know where I was anymore. That's when I heard it. The laughter. It wasn't loud, just a soft chuckle, faint and distant, like it was coming from someone just out of sight. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart skipping a beat. It wasn't the laughter of someone nearby. It was echoing, like it came from deeper within the forest. But that didn't make any sense. There was no one out here with me. I was sure of it. I called out, my voice feeling weak in the overwhelming silence. Hello? Is someone there? The forest responded with nothing but the rustling of leaves. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. That feeling, like I wasn't alone, like something or someone was watching, was impossible to shake. But I couldn't see anyone. I couldn't hear footsteps. Couldn't hear anything besides the faintest hint of that laughter. The sound seemed to float above me, then fade away, only to return again, a little closer, a little more distinct. I didn't know what to do, but I kept walking, and that's when everything changed. The path in front of me didn't look like a path anymore. It was like the trees had shifted, like the whole forest was moving, folding in on itself. The once clear trail became a maze of twisted roots and undergrowth, and it felt like the ground was slipping beneath my feet. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was the feeling that I was moving in a direction I didn't choose. My feet were still moving, one step after the other, but it wasn't like I was walking of my own accord. It was like the forest itself was pulling me, guiding me, and I couldn't stop. My heart raced, but my legs didn't falter. The trees closed in tighter, and I could feel the temperature drop. It was like I was walking through an invisible barrier, a membrane between this world and another, and I was being pulled across. I tried to stop. I tried to turn around, to retrace my steps, but the forest was wrong. It was wrong in a way I can't explain, in a way that made me feel like I wasn't supposed to be here, like something was watching me from just beyond the edge of my vision. That's when I saw it. First, it was just a shadow, flickering in the corner of my eye. But then it took shape, a figure standing between the trees, just out of reach, half hidden by the underbrush. It wasn't a man. It wasn't anything that made sense. It was tall, too tall, and its shape shifted like smoke, like something not meant for this world. The laughter, that soft, eerie laugh, came again, this time much closer, as though the figure was right behind me. I didn't stop to think. I turned and ran. I ran faster than I had ever run in my life, not knowing where I was going, only knowing that I had to get out. The trees blurred past me, and every step felt like the ground beneath me was shifting, like the forest itself was trying to hold me back. The laughter grew louder, closer, until it was in my ears, ringing in my head. But I didn't dare look back. Somehow, I found the edge of the forest. I burst into the clearing, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The sun had nearly set, and the last light of day cast long shadows across the open ground. But there was nothing behind me, nothing but the fading echoes of that damn laugh. I didn't wait to catch my breath. I didn't stop until I was back at my car, the engine roaring to life as I sped away from that cursed place. I don't know what happened in the royal forest. I don't know what was following me or what that thing in the trees was, but I know this. There's something out there, something in that forest, something that watches, that waits, and I'll never go back to find out what it is. Story number 3. The Haunted Tunnel. I never believed in ghosts. I had heard the stories everyone had, but I always thought they were just that. Stories, folklore, urban legends, something to tell around a campfire to scare the kids. But what happened to me that day, in that forest in Spain, changed everything, and I'm still not sure if I believe it, but I can't forget it. It started out as a simple hike, just me and my backpack, walking through a quiet stretch of forest in the hills of northern Spain. I was traveling solo, on a trip to clear my head, to be alone with my thoughts and the world around me. The forest was exactly what I needed. Peaceful, remote. It was a place that seemed untouched, wild. As I walked deeper into the trees, I began to feel that familiar sense of freedom, just me, the earth beneath my boots, and the soft whisper of the wind through the leaves. But it didn't stay peaceful for long. I wasn't sure when I first noticed it. Maybe it was when the birds stopped singing, or when the breeze seemed to die down. But there was something strange about the air around me. Felt too still, too thick. I shook it off at first, thinking it was just the isolation getting to me. I'd been walking for hours by that point, and I was probably just overthinking it. But then I heard it, the footsteps. I paused, looking around. The forest was eerily silent. The only sound the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. But there it was again, soft, steady, like someone walking just behind me. I spun around, heart racing, expecting to see someone, a hiker, maybe, or some animal. But there was no one, just the trees, the same as they had been a moment ago. Probably just my imagination, I muttered to myself, trying to laugh it off. But the footsteps didn't stop. They were getting closer now, echoing through the woods. Quickened my pace, telling myself it was nothing, a deer, a squirrel. But the feeling that someone or something was following me was undeniable. And it wasn't just the sound of the steps anymore. It was the feeling, the oppressive, suffocating sense that I wasn't alone, that something was watching me. I tried to focus, to steady myself, keep moving, keep going. I thought. The path was narrowing now, winding through thick underbrush, and I could see the faint glimmer of sunlight ahead. It was then that I saw it, a stone tunnel, half hidden among the trees. I had read about this place before, a forgotten relic of some old road that had been abandoned long ago. People said it was a part of the old Spanish trails, something left behind by travelers from centuries ago. But I never imagined I'd actually stumble upon it. The tunnel was small, almost like an afterthought, a dark, gaping mouth in the side of the hill, just big enough for someone to slip through. There was a strange pull about it, something that made my legs move on their own. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the growing unease gnawing at the back of my mind. But before I could think better of it, I stepped forward and into the darkness. The air was colder inside, the temperature dropping several degrees the moment I crossed the threshold. The tunnel was low, the stone walls slick with moisture. I could barely make out the outline of the far side, but it seemed far too far to reach. And as I moved deeper inside, I began to feel that pressure, like the walls were closing in on me, or like the tunnel was shifting, moving with me. I was no longer just walking through the dark. I was being watched. The sound of the footsteps grew louder. They were inside the tunnel with me now. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The footsteps were echoing off the walls, moving faster now, as if something was racing toward me. But there was no one behind me. I spun around again, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something in the shadows, a figure, tall and indistinct, standing just beyond the reach of my flashlight. My heart skipped a beat. I took a step back, then another. My hand fumbled for the entrance, but when I looked up, the tunnel was different. It was longer now. The stone walls stretched farther than they had before. The opening was nowhere to be seen. I turned in a circle, my breath quickening, and for the first time in my life, I felt a cold wave of pure terror wash over me. The air in the tunnel was thick with the smell of earth and decay, and it felt wrong. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out, to turn around, to run, but I couldn't. I was trapped, caught in some sort of loop, or worse, some kind of nightmare that refused to let me wake up. That's when I heard the voice. It was a soft whisper at first, like a breath against the back of my neck. It said something in Spanish, something I couldn't understand. But I knew it wasn't meant for me. It was for someone else. Someone who had been here before me, who had walked this path before and had never left. Vite. The voice whispered. Leave. I bolted. I don't remember much after that, just running, stumbling, the sound of my heart hammering in my chest. I remember the walls pressing in, the shadows flickering just beyond my vision, and the crushing sense that I was being dragged toward something waiting for me at the end of the tunnel. The footsteps were all around me now, deafening, echoing with the sound of thousands of voices that weren't mine. When I finally reached the end of the tunnel, I burst out into the forest, gasping for air. I didn't stop to look back. I didn't want to know if anything was following me. I just ran. My legs burned. My chest ached. But the tunnel, that accursed tunnel, was gone. The path I had taken no longer looked like the one I had walked in on. The trees were wrong. The ground was wrong. I found my way back to the main trail somehow, disoriented and terrified. I don't know how long I wandered, but when I finally stumbled across a road and a couple of hikers, I could barely catch my breath enough to explain. The tunnel was gone, completely gone. No sign of it, no trace. The hikers looked at me like I was crazy when I tried to describe it. They said there was no such place in the area. When I left Spain, I tried to convince myself it had been nothing more than an illusion, a trick of the mind. But there are times late at night, when the wind howls and the world is too quiet, that I can still hear the whispers. And sometimes, I swear I can still feel the cold air on my face, the footsteps behind me. I haven't been back to Spain since, but I think about that tunnel often, and I can't help but wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't run? What if I had stayed just a little longer? I'm not sure I want to know the answer,